Hello everyone and welcome back to Southern Wealth. I hope you guys are doing very well. If you do enjoy the content, please consider dropping that like and subscribe. As you guys know, it's the only thing that I ask. So, we talked about this yesterday, that this week, maybe early next week, will probably be the bottom of this massive short-term flash crash, if you will. One of the good things that has happened already is Jim Cramer is extremely bearish, so that's very good. Peter Schiff just predicted the Black Monday, number 19 since 2022, in his in his video, and Harry Dent is back to talking about a 94% crash in the Nasdaq and an 88 or 86% crash in the S&P. So basically, the typical permanent bearish people or the inverse oracle gods are back to being bearish and throwing all sorts of things out there. Now, if you actually look at what has been happening, so China put in place retaliatory tariffs. This is actually much less impactful towards the US because the US exports much less goods to China, so it doesn't really matter that much. And the reaction came very quick, which tells some sort of desperation. So, for example, in this case, I think Europe is playing it better in the sense of relaxing, thinking before doing anything. What's also been happening that I haven't seen many people talking about is that Vietnam already came out and said they are willing to drop every type of tariffs and controls they have against US goods. Cambodia just said the same thing. And the UK Prime Minister just said that they want to start negotiating a trade deal agreement with the US as soon as possible. So the games begin. The race for the deal with the US begins. Now, I've talked about this before, and I truly believe, I mean, it's just my belief, right? I can be completely off, but this is what I think. This type of tariffs and uncertainty would create massive issues in the stock market. Now, yes, the top 10% owns 88% of the stock market, so you can make the argument that this really impacts the top 10%. So in terms of voters, is not the worst of things. But we know that in the US, the elections are decided on very minor things. So this is the perfect timing to do something like this because we are very far away from the midterms. In the midterms, obviously Trump is not up to be defeated, but basically Republicans can lose the Congress and the Senate and the House, right? So if you do it now, hopefully by the time you get to those elections, most people already forgot what happened at this time period. And so that's timing number one. Timing number two is this is really against mostly European Union, China, and to some degree Canada and Mexico is mostly for different reasons than pure trade. It has to do with immigration and the fentanyl and all of that. And I mean, the illegal immigration is down 95% versus last year. So it's an amazing achievement already. But this obviously only matters really to Americans, right? I mean, people who don't live there don't really care about it. That's why you don't hear much about it. And also because it's a good thing. Because it's a good thing, then the media will not talk about it because, well, we need to spend all day long bashing him. So we cannot say anything good. But why now? Look at the major... Canada is in a very difficult position economically. That's one of the reasons why Trudeau's approval rating was the lowest there's ever been. Secondly, the UK has experienced several years of flat economic growth together with high inflation. So when people talk about stagflation, we already have it. It's called the UK. Germany and France is even worse. Forget about things like security and the deterioration of safety in Europe. Just look at it from an economic standpoint. Both countries were under contraction last year. Italy is also flat like the UK. So for the four biggest economies, the only exception really is Spain growing at 3+%, and Portugal's also doing quite well at close to 2%. But if you look at the largest economies in Europe, France, Germany, UK, Italy, they are struggling very much already. Forget about the tariffs, before the tariffs. And now they will need to divert huge amounts of resources to something they haven't been doing for decades, called defense. Now people say, no, but if they spend money on defense, it's good because GDP goes up, right? What is the productivity of war equipment? How does that benefit me and you? It doesn't. Now it can do something. Oh yeah, the companies are paying VAT or whatever. Yes, okay. But what is the end result? What is the product actually at the end? It's something to destroy other stuff. Think about it, right? It makes no sense. China is in deflation, is fighting deflation every way they can, and they're struggling immensely with overcapacity. So they've built, the way that they grew so fast was all exponential debt expansion, build, produce, but then with the one-child policy stuff, and eventually there's a limit to how much you can do this. Now they have overcapacity for almost anything. Which puts a lot of deflationary pressures. We've talked about this. Deflationary pressures are good for the people, but the government and companies have too much debt, so deflation is not good for them because they need to pay. Debt is paying currency in the future with interest, so you don't want that currency to be worth more in the future. What happens to that overcapacity when China loses a big part of its number one client? It's a big deal. So my feeling is that we're going to have some sort of alignment in terms of trade agreements, and we're going to stop doing many of the things that we've been seeing over the past few decades. So for example, and forget about the US, let's take the US out of the equation, okay? A lot of industries in Europe, like chemicals and metals, steel, for example, in particular, have suffered a lot with the Chinese imports because Chinese companies many times are supported by the state, by the government, and that's how they can dump their products extremely cheap, meaning a normal company cannot do it because they go bankrupt, but they can do it because the state is behind them. Now, is this a tariff? No. But basically, a lot of companies in Europe have gone bankrupt because they cannot compete with the pressure coming from China. But it's not because the Chinese companies are extremely efficient. It's because they have funding from the government that prevents them to go bankrupt. Now, that's a way of unfair competition. There's no tariff. There's no 5% tariff or anything like that, but it has the same effect. Same thing when, Chinese companies can come to Europe and have a subsidiary and do business in Europe. But if you want to do business in China, you need to team up with a local partner. And in many situations, that local partner then takes your know-how to develop their own stuff in-house. So is this fair trade? No. For decades, nobody, particularly in the US, cared much about it because they had the reserve currency. So they can just issue that, print money, and pay the deficits. The problem is American companies say, hey, I cannot compete because they have tariffs on me and we don't have on them. So F it, I'm going to close my plant in Detroit and I'm going to open it in Vietnam, in Germany, in Poland, whatever. One thing is for sure, not in the US. So how do things look when tariffs are not around? Because there's this notion that, oh, the Americans, they don't build anything, they don't export anything, this is terrible, right? Go to Dubai. The UAE has no tariffs with the US, pretty much. You have American products in many places, just like you have, European products. So when those barriers are not in place, you can actually have a lot of success. But this is the point that people don't understand. Just because the US can afford not building stuff because they have the world reserve currency, and that part is true, and obviously if you just look at pure stock market doesn't care about people in the US losing their jobs, communities destroyed. That part they don't care. They care about the margins. So yes, if you can close your factories in the US and move everything to Europe and Asia or Mexico, you do it. But the question is this happening because they are so much more efficient, or because they are doing things that the US is not doing against them? Now, obviously, the tariffs that came, the 90%, oh, Vietnam charges a 90% tariff on us. Of course, that is BS. But that is to trigger a discussion that's already happening, which is Vietnam president already came out and said, I'm happy to take all tariffs out of the US. And this is where I think we're going to end up, which I think is going to be beneficial for a lot of people. And what I'm trying to flag is the timing of the thing. Why now? Why not in a year from now? Why now? Why not in 6 months? They came with a plan, and I mean they've told us. Trump, Bessent, Vance, all of them. Rates are too high. What has happened to rates? Came down. Oil is too high. What has happened to oil? Came down. Dollar is too high. What happened? Dollar came down. Other stuff, nobody's paying attention. Since Trump has been in office, he already got the commitment of around $3 trillion. 1.4 trillion from the UAE, 600 billion from the Saudis, that's 2 trillion, 100 billion from the Taiwanese semiconductor company, $500 billion from Apple, and then it's divided between a lot of companies, but basically it totals around 300 billion. We're talking 2.9 trillion dollars already. He's in office not even 2 months. But of course, we live in the world of no patience. Everything needs to happen tomorrow. Otherwise, this is a huge, terrible thing, blah, blah, blah. Now, looking at the markets, of course, stocks collapsed completely. One of the good things is that the Russell this time collapsed a little bit less than the others. The Russell is now in the bear market. The S&P, I think, if not in the bear market, it's very close. The Dow Jones, similar things. NASDAQ, similar things. As I've mentioned, I think the worst would happen this week. Can we still have some weakness beginning of next week? I think so. I think it's possible. It's my opinion that the CPI reading, I get the feeling, will be coming better than people expect, and substantially better. And the Fed should already be cutting rates, but he won't cut rates because, to be honest, he hates Trump. So he will delay cutting rates as much as possible. See, he had no troubles cutting rates in September when inflation was worse than now and the employment was better than now. Then he had no problems trying to get his buddies elected. But all of a sudden now he needs to wait, we don't know, blah, blah, blah. It's all the same thing, right? This is terrible because all the other central banks are cutting rates. So once again, American companies are getting funding at 5 and 6%, and the other companies getting funding at 3 and 4. So once again, it's you're competing on, but this case is not the other country's problem, is actually the US one problem. So stocks sold off quite aggressively. We were expecting it. We talked about it yesterday. Now, what I'm most surprised about is how strong crypto was. Now, we are entering the weekend. Can there be some shenanigans? Volume gets very low. Liquidity gets very thin. So it's very easy to move the markets over the weekends. That's why you've seen some. And by the way, I think there's going to be some many news over the weekend. So that's something that I think can change. So, but I mean, Bitcoin's above 84K, Ethereum is above 1800, Solana is above 125. A lot of coins were, what I'm trying to say is that a lot of coins were green, particularly Bitcoin, which is the most important at this stage, while everything else was in deep red. By the way, funny thing, Peter Schiff posts a couple of days, 2 or 3 days ago, about oil prices just went above $71. Basically, we were retesting the 200-day moving average, by the way, which was rejected very aggressively, and then oil completely collapsed. So now he doesn't talk about oil. What is the, I don't know, I don't understand. What is this oil? Never talked about it. I don't know. Maybe next time when oil is above 80, then he's going to get excited again. He always get excited at the top, and he pretends the assets don't exist at the bottom. So silver has also disappeared. No conversation about silver. So, and I think soon enough, no conversation about gold probably, since the miners got hit almost 10% today. So, and he has half of his wealth in the miners. So expect that as well. Yeah, to be honest, I really think there's a very good chance the worst is over. I think the beginning of next week can be a little bit tough. Expect some crazy moves in crypto over the weekend, because I think some news will come out, and it's the only market open. Liquidity is low, volume is low, easy to manipulate. So I think that's to be expected. Altcoins have held also quite decently. Once again, I think altcoins have been punched so hard that, I mean, you truly have, at this point, probably only have true believers left. What's the idea? I think going forward for the administration that will have a massive impact. I think the idea is this. Personal opinion. I think Doge and some of the tariffs that will be kept in place will lead to some extra revenue for the government. That will allow the people that make 150K or less, which is 90% of population, to either stop paying income tax or paying substantially less income tax. And now you tell me, but that's completely impossible. Can you imagine the amount of money that must be? 90% of the population pays less again and makes less than 150K. But that's only about 27% of the income tax revenue. Oh, that's around $300 billion. Well, if Doge saves $1 trillion, and let's say tariffs gives you $500 billion, is it that difficult to cut 300 billion? Let's say you don't cut 300 billion. Let's say you move all those taxes to 15%, 1.5. What would that do for American productivity? How would that do to attract talent from other countries? I mean, people are charged, they pay 40, 50, 60, 65% taxes in Europe, for example. How many people would consider moving to the US on that basis? So, are the tariffs good, are the tariffs bad? It's difficult to say at this stage until you see the full game. I think if you look at the full game, it will probably be very good. Not necessarily about the tariffs directly, but basically what it will allow to do in terms of agreements and potentially alleviating the tax burden of the middle class in particular and the poorest people. Because, as I said, the prices of 2019 are not coming back. So what's the solution? The solution is let people have more money in their pockets to accommodate the higher prices, the higher cost of living. So for example, if the cost of living has gone up 30% over the last 4 years, and you can bring your income up 35% over the next 4 years with prices, or let's say you can bring income in general, up, salaries up 45%, then all of a sudden you get to the same place, which is you can live better, but the prices don't necessarily come down. So I think that's the goal. Will it work? We have to see. people. I mean, one of the things that gives me a lot of confidence is that all the economists, which, if you're an economist, find me one that has made any money in the market. I don't know anybody. So all the economists are on this side, plus Jim Cramer, plus Peter Schiff, plus Harry Dent. All these people are in the same camp. My experience with big recessions and crashes is that they happen when nobody can see anything bad coming. Think 2000, think 2008. And now you tell me, oh, that's many years ago. Okay. Think 2021. 2021, if you made a survey, if you ask a survey to people, do you think next year will be better than this one? Most likely people will say, oh yeah, sure. Sure, it's going to be great. Consumer sentiment was at high levels, blah, blah. What happened? War, energy crisis, inflation, a complete disaster. And then in 2022, people were predicting that 2023 was going to be a disaster for the markets. Going to be depression 2.0, the end of the world. Then I created my channel, and they were making the same predictions for the second half of 2023 or 2024. And then they spent the entirety of 2023 predicting the crash and disaster of 2024. What happened? The complete opposite. And now they're expecting the crash and the end of the world. It's going to be super inflationary. There's no hope, blah, blah, blah. Again, I'm going to be very concerned when all these people are very convinced that the American economy is unstoppable, that we're going to go... Oh, this is what actually Jim Cramer said back in 2021, that the economic juggernaut, that's his expression, the economic juggernaut of the US could not be stopped. That was the top. And with that, thank you very much for your support, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.